the EM Roundtable. If you're just joining us, feel free to put your name and your location in the chat. If you feel real froggy, go ahead and put your position in that you currently work at. You don't have to put your actual company that you work at. But welcome, and we'll be starting in just a minute. All right, we'll go ahead and get started and we'll just start seeing folks trickle in. So again, welcome everybody to the EM Roundtable. Tonight we have a really great discussion and a really great guest, Dr. Kate Starbird. The discussion today, or the topic, will be on mis and disinformation. And as you guys already know, there's a lot of mis and disinformation that's going around in today's world. You might hear it from friends on social media, at work, wherever. There's a lot of it that's happening. And so before we get started, I'd like to say that our EM Roundtable is in partnership with not just AEMO, but Emergency Management External Affairs Association, EMEA, the State of Disaster podcast that's hosted by Matt Green, and also Pierce College Emergency Management. Today is also going to be facilitated by Sarah Miller. Just a few housekeeping rules. I know nobody here is going to do anything outlandish or inappropriate, but if you want to have your video on, feel free to do so. This will be recorded. You will be able to watch the video later. Just keep your mic off. If you have to go do something, turn your video off. Make sure that you're not around any distractions. We love our pets, but please make sure that they're not in view of the camera. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce Sarah Miller. Sarah Miller is the chair and associate professor at Pierce College in Lakewood, Washington. I actually attended there. She's my former professor as well when I was at the Homeland Security Emergency Management Program. And so she will go ahead and introduce Kate Starbird.
All right. Thanks, Brandy. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. When Matt called me on the phone, which I knew meant it was an emergency, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be facilitating an EM roundtable, and I can't do it. And can you please do it?" I said, "Who is it?" He said, "Kate Starbird." I said, "I will clear my calendar and I will be there." So, in our little full circle moment, Kate Starbird's a professor at the Department of Human-Centered Design and Engineering at University of Washington, but her research is about misinformation and the intersection of humans and computers and crisis informatics at the end of the day. So she's going to tell you what all that means. But also long ago, Kate graduated from our college as well. So we had this little moment where the three of us had this Pierce College connection. So Kate, I'm delighted that you're here. I know that you have a PhD in technology, media, and society from the University of Colorado, and that you were the founder and the director of the UW Center for an Informed Public. So with that, hello, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. No, it was fun when we were talking about Pierce earlier. I was at Lakes High School and I did my running start over at Pierce. I would walk across the street and down the road. So it's lovely to be here with you all and to have a chance to talk about my research and actually ways that it probably applies to you all that I haven't thought about in a few years. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to how how I became the researcher I am today and why that has anything to do with what you all care about. Um, I did my PhD. I started my PhD in around 2008, and I was at the University of Colorado, and I was working with a professor there, brilliant professor, Laisha Palin. Laisha Palin coined the term crisis informatics. She was one of the first people doing research on how social media and other information communication technologies were going to sort of change how people communicate during crisis events. Did initial work around Hurricane Katrina, and then some early work around the shooting at Virginia Tech, and then the Haiti earthquake. And I joined about the time we were looking at the Haiti earthquake and a number of other kind of crisis events. And initially, for my research and where I ended up with my dissertation was looking at online volunteerism and how all these people would converge onto social media to try to help during these times of crises, and how like there was new information available that could be useful, but also all sorts of things happening there that were good, bad, and everything in between. Um, but I used to say that I studied the best of the best of humankind during these crisis events, and then over time I began to sort of drift into studying the worst of humanity during these crisis events. And what happened with that is around 2012, I shifted to University of Washington and started doing research on my own, and not on my own, but with my own lab and students that have been working with me and other colleagues. And initially, I was still doing work mostly focused on how people come together to help each other during times of crisis. I had a couple of, was still kind of talking to emergency managers on how they might use these tools to communicate with their audiences. But the Boston Marathon bombings happened in 2013, and we wrote our first grant to study rumors and rumoring after crisis events, after that particular crisis event. I don't know if you remember it, but there were a number of like blatantly false things that were spreading, but there were also this sort of online sleuthing or digital volunteerism actually turned into digital vigilantism as the crowd kept started to point fingers at the wrong person. They were trying to help often, but they often also got it wrong in that case. And so after the Boston Marathon bombing, we began to say, okay, let's actually make a research program over studying sort of rumors in times of crisis. And if I think back to like 2010 to 2012, where we're first starting to converge onto these platforms, a lot of folks are using Twitter. It seems to be a place where information, you can find good information. It's a little bit rough, but like, there's live, like really rich information happening after crisis events. We used to think that like misinformation was a very small part of what we were seeing. When we did that early research on Haiti earthquake, we found a couple of rumors. We kind of found a couple of cases of intentionally false information, but it was a really small part of the signal. But between 2012 probably is when it starts to pick up with Hurricane Sandy and others. But our research from 2013 to 2016, we begin to see, we think there's going to be some rumors. It becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger part of what we were seeing. And initially, we set out to find what we called the self-correcting crowd, how the crowd would like, okay, there might be a rumor, but the crowd is going to call it out and it's going to like, it'll be a self-cleansing machine and we'll get rid of all the falsehoods. And by 2013, 2014, we're like, that's not what's happening here. The rumors were spreading far further than any of the corrections. And in fact, we were beginning to realize that the platforms themselves were sort of like already they were rewarding falsehoods, especially during times of crisis, and we could talk about why. But they were rewarding those falsehoods, and then the system was becoming wired where the people who would game the system after crisis events to get attention by sharing a rumor or a falsehood or a politicized version of what was going on, they would gain more and more attention. They would become bigger and bigger accounts, and so they started sort of having this outsized influence. We call them influencers now. We didn't call them that yet then, but we started to see these folks rise in influence, and the network sort of became wired to spread rumors after crisis events, and in part by people sort of gaming the system during that time. So around 2015, 2016, my team realizes we're not looking at accidental rumors. We are looking at pervasive disinformation that's sinking into the infrastructure of the internet. Since then, my team studied intentional disinformation campaigns by Russia and some others. Syria and Iran governments were in some of that data. One of those was the campaign targeting the White Helmets, which is a humanitarian response organization in Syria. Another one was the campaign in 2016 targeting US citizens, and we saw how they targeted both sides of the Black Lives Matter conversation. They impersonated activists on both sides of the political spectrum and manipulated that conversation. And so we did a few studies on that. In 2020, we were looking to support election officials to help kind of gather information and help call out rumors about like when and where to vote, so people wouldn't have be suppressed. And we ended up documenting the big lie kind of taking shape on social media during that election. So have spent a lot of time since thinking about sort of election misinformation, election rumors. We're actually calling them a lot rumors now. And I can talk about why I use the frame of rumors rather than misinformation. I think it's been a valuable shift for us. It's actually a shift back. We started out calling them rumors, then we followed everybody to call it misinformation, and we've gone back to rumors because it's a real valuable way of thinking about the problem. But still doing a lot of that work now. Started with a little lab and a few students, and now work with the Center for an Informed Public, helped co-found the center. My colleague Emma Spiro, who also started in crisis informatics and now does online misinformation and similar things, she's currently the director of the Center for Informed Public. We do a lot of collaboration together. We have 5 founding faculty, and we have about 20 affiliate faculty at the University of Washington, and more than 40 students that are working with us on projects at any one time. So got a lot of folks doing research right now, really thinking about video formats. A lot of research on like what do we do with short form video. A lot of students looking at TikTok, conspiracy theorizing on TikTok after crisis events is a big thing. Still thinking about sort of how influence intersects with information sharing, and especially during times of crisis. You all know this more than anyone, but like crisis events have all this uncertainty. Information is still moving. People that are trustworthy are kind of slow to get started because they want to get all the facts. And social media allows others to fill that gap with bullshit. Excuse me, but that's a technical term, so I might use it again. So we see crisis events as just they've always been a time of sort of information moving and rumors and kinds of things. But since I've been studying this, what we might call bad actors or aspiring influencers, whatever you might want to call them, have leveraged that uncertainty of crisis events to gain outsized attention. And a little bit of what the situation we are facing now is in part how people have been able to manipulate information spaces during times of crisis. That's my intro. I'm happy to talk more about any one part of this. I've got tons of studies going on now. I do less and less of it. There's so many PhD students doing the work. I'm mostly a manager at this point, but I'm still really involved in the election research and some of the TikTok research, which I think is really closely related to some of the things you all think about.
Yeah. So, and I think for our audience, because our audience, a lot of them are students, right? So some may just be beginning to think about some of these things as they're contemplating getting into the field of emergency management and how these things might impact them. You made an interesting comment that we went from rumors to misinformation. We're back to rumors. Can you give us a sort of an overview of misinformation, malinformation,
Yeah.
disinformation, rumors, false claims? Like, is there a difference, and do we care if there's a difference?
Yeah, this is a great question. I have a whole set of slides, or like 6 or 8 slides, where I do definitions when I give a talk. So I can go through them a little bit. The first thing I say is like the vocabulary is dynamic. The phenomenon is changing, and so the vocabulary itself has been a little bit dynamic over the last few years. People draw the lines a little bit differently with some of these buckets of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, which I don't use, but I'm happy to help define. Um, it's also adversarial, where people have tried to redefine some of these terms to make them unusable. So they've been politicized. If you go into a party in certain kinds of company and you say the word misinformation, you will get called all sorts of names. And I've, even as a person who does this research, have been even more careful with the words I use, because I know that certain audiences have a tendency to equate the labeling of misinformation with censorship. And so it becomes difficult to use some of these terms. We also saw the term fake news get redefined and turned upside down on its head. And so we don't, and so we have to recognize that these terms are contested, adversarial, and dynamic. That said, our team is sort of converged on a set of terms that we use in our work we find really valuable. And some of these we use for our research. We might use a different set of vocabulary in certain kinds of communication, but words mean things, and it's important to like distinguish between meanings. So let me start with misinformation. So misinformation can be an umbrella term often for a lot of these things, but misinformation means information that's false. We don't have to know whether and why it's false. We don't have to know intention. It's just sort of an umbrella term for information that's false, but not necessarily intentionally false. Disinformation, on the other hand, is information that is misleading and is intentionally spread for some kind of purpose, like for political purpose, for financial, reputational gain. One of the things about disinformation that I find really interesting, a couple of things. One is it's often not completely false. It's often built around a true or plausible core and then layered with distortions and exaggerations to create a false sense of what's going on. So it's misleading often rather than false. Also, disinformation for me is rarely one piece of content. It's usually a bunch of different information actions that work together to mislead. And often if you just take one piece of content, it's kind of superficially true, but you combine it with the other kinds of things and you begin to realize this is meant to distort how people are thinking about things. Another thing about disinformation, it's intentional at some level, but when I go on social media and I look at who's spreading disinformation, the vast majority of people who spread disinformation are either true believers of it or they just haven't decided, they didn't even bother to think about whether or not it was true. So disinformation is often spread by unwitting agents, unwitting but willing, right? They like the information, it aligns with what they want to believe, they spread it, but they don't necessarily know that it's a lie. So that's disinformation. Those terms I think are helpful. After the fact, you're doing some research studies, there was a lot of disinformation happening that could be useful. In the moment, it is very hard to label something as misinformation or disinformation, especially during a crisis event. To know whether something is true or false or somewhere in between, it's kind of, you don't know yet. If something is intentional or not, you don't know. You don't know whether, even if you know it's false, you don't know whether it's intentional or not. It takes a while. So we have kind of returned to the term rumor to help us kind of, especially in our real-time work, to help us when we've got something, it's contested somewhere, or it's uncertain, or it's traveling through informal channels. It hasn't been vetted, but it could be true. It's likely false, but it could be true. And so rumors are actually how we make sense of rumors are a natural part of the collective sense making that happens during crisis events. There's sort of like as humans, we come together, something's happening, information is sort of ambiguous. We want to think about what's going on. We come up with theories about what's happening, and we create rumors. And from that sense, initially when we started studying in this space and using rumor, we made a point of like rumors aren't necessarily bad, right? They serve psychological roles, they serve social purposes during crisis events and informational purposes. Even when a rumor turns out to be false, it contains a signal that you might want, as an emergency manager, you might want to know about something that people are afraid of, they're concerned about, or a real confusion that they have, right? So rumors are actually a really good signal. And at times, rumors can turn out to be true, right? Think about something horrible that's happened in a community, whether it's a sport coach who turns out to be a jerk, or it's, some poison in the river or whatever, often starts out as a rumor, and it takes a while for it to grow and for people to recognize what's going on, right? So we have cases like rumors are not necessarily bad. Rumors can turn out to be true. At the same time, like pervasive rumoring, especially in a crisis event, can actually cause people to make decisions that are maladaptive or dangerous or whatever. And so treating something as a rumor means that you can start working on it in real time. You can think about resolving the rumor, having a dialogue about the rumor rather than correcting it, controlling it, or stamping a big X of misinformation on it, right? So if you call something a rumor, that starts a dialogue rather than shutting it down. And it allows you to kind of work with an audience to kind of get to the bottom of what their concerns are and help correct that information. Now, rumor doesn't work when someone is purposefully spreading disinformation, right? So like when you get to the end and you find out that someone's, it's a troll, they're constantly in there, or someone who's like a very dedicated conspiracy theorist or someone who's an outside agitator, having a dialogue with them is not going to help, right? So really the rumoring term is like you don't yet know what that audience is. You treat them initially as like open-minded, you're working with them to work things out. And at some point you may want to change that orientation. But we find that that orientation for our real-time work and we do real-time work around election rumors, is really much better than putting a misinformation or trying to put a misinformation label on something where you can learn later that you made a mistake and you've lost all your credibility. I hope that's helpful.
I think that was very helpful. So I think there's a couple of things in here, but I think one of the things that maybe we should know or learn about is how or why or where do rumors and misinformation originate? You touched on a little bit of it, but can you give us a little more depth on that?
Where do they originate? All sorts of places. They we had a research study where we were trying to track that for rumors, and like sometimes the same rumor shows up in four different places at once, and they're disconnected just because people misinterpret the what's happening in the same way, right? So rumors can come from everyday um, collective sense making processes, people trying to make sense of what's going on. In a world where everything is connected now, so it used to be if there was a rumor about a crisis event that was happening locally, it was going from person to person, and it was going to be slow to move, but it was going to be happening, in these interpersonal relationships that were sort of one to one as it moved. Now we have these social media where we have this ability to participate at scale in new ways, and it also opens up all sorts of new ways for rumors to get started and for rumors to spread. So I would say during a crisis event, if I can go back to like the Boulder fires in 2012, we saw rumors coming out of like everyday people just like seeing things and getting it wrong and like misinterpreting things. We saw them be like just mischievous actors that were outside that just wanted to stoke fear and be a jerk and like put bad things in the space. That kind of rumors there. We see political actors using crisis events to do what we call political framing contests, where they want to, don't let a good crisis go to waste. They want to twist the events of the crisis into something that they can score political points with. And this is a sport that is probably one of the most popular sports in social media spaces, especially during crisis events. You see this political framing contests happen almost instantly to try to, especially if it's a man-made crisis, they're going to try to pin it on the other party in some way. But even when it's like a natural disaster, they're trying to blame whoever's in office. They're trying to blame the other party in whatever way. So we see those framing contests. Those will spin out rumors. We've seen foreign governments that are just trying to stoke, fear and distrust in information spaces, and just to demonstrate that our ways of communicating are broken, have spread purposeful rumors during crisis events. We also see like there's a conspiracy theory epistemology or frame that a lot of people have. It's been growing in recent years, and the internet has played a role in that. But folks that have that epistemology, or we say they have like a conspiracy theory frame, will tend to see the events of a new disaster or a new crisis through that frame and create a new sort of rumor about that fits with their ongoing conspiracy theory. So we see rumors come from that as well. They're not purposefully necessarily doing it. It's just how they're seeing they're fitting the evidence of the day, the new events of the day, into their existing frames that everything's a conspiracy. So a lot of different ways. So everything from mischievous to political objectives to like people like just honestly getting things wrong, like and trying to figure out what to do and how to do it, and just misreading things for whatever reason. So.
Well, and I think that this is sort of the human nature, right? We only know what we know, and we try and slot everything into something we already know, and sometimes we're wrong.
Yeah, we call this frames. Like we think about sense making right now as happening through a combination of like there's the facts of the that are of the matter that we can kind of see emerging. Okay, we've got a fire over there, and this piece of information here, and then we have these frames, and these frames are our way of selecting which facts to focus on, and then giving meaning to what those facts are. And we all have different frames due to our experiences, and in fact, like a more expert emergency manager is going to have a different set of frames than a more junior one. There's some great work from Carl Weick on crisis response organizations and framing. Um, but what happens if we don't use the right frame, we might exclude evidence that was important and focus on the wrong evidence. And in a healthy collective sense making process, we're quick to recognize that and we swap out and get a new frame. We're like, oh, that one's broken. I got to get another one. But when things go wrong, we often anchor on the wrong frame early on and we exclude evidence that would counter our current theory and we double down on it and we begin to sort of like assemble evidence to fit this existing frame. And so our frames are actually being distorted by disinformation online. And that's playing a role in the generation of rumors and the spread of rumors, is we're beginning to see the evidence of the day through these strategically manipulated frames. And that's one of our theories about how disinformation isn't always just about dropping bad facts into a space. It's about shaping the frames through which we view the facts.
And I think when I think about response and I think about incident management, we might call that tunnel vision. You've gotten
Yeah.
so focused on a point of view that you don't see the thing that's about to eat you or whatever's going to happen, right? Then that happens. How do you think that we can control that in our own selves and then help the people around us make better decisions around our frames?
Yeah, I should have a better answer to that. I'd probably point you to Carl White because he unpacks a couple of the there's the Storm King Mountain fire and the Bhopal disaster, and he unpacks them and sort of shows how someone makes an early kind of misinterpretation of something, then anchors on the wrong frame, and then they just never kind of like they're never able to kind of go back. I think a little humility goes a long way. Being able to recognize when you've got a difference of opinion, you need to like being able to like just swap out frames. This is what we tell people, not in even the crisis space. I tell them in the like information space. Sometimes like you've got your frame, you're looking at it. I use an example of whether UFOs are aliens or a government project or just like people misinterpreting things. So we've got like a nice little game that we play. But if you can just get someone to switch out and look at the evidence through another frame, it gives you empathy of like, oh, that's what they're seeing. That's why they're not seeing this. And it could allow you to see something that you missed. And so just being willing to like for a couple of minutes, okay, I've made a couple of decisions. And let me just swap out what would this look like if I tried on a different theory, I tried on a different frame. And that can be really valuable because I mean, uh, Carl Weick will explain this. It's a researcher that did so much work on this that a lot of like some of the worst disasters you can kind of go down to like people have they make a first decision and then they double down and they triple down on continuing to read what comes next through that initial kind of frame. And if they had looked at it differently, it would have taken them in a different direction.
That was a great answer for what it's worth.
Oh, thank you.
So how do you think all of this impacts? This is a big question. How does this impact us as a society, and then specifically in emergency management?
Do y'all
Okay,
have
you
an
can just
hour?
pick a
You have
piece
like an
if
hour
you
and a
want.
half. You have like I mean, that's a full class. That's a 10-week class there. How does it impact us? Which part, right? Like, I think one of the things we're experiencing now as a society, not just here in the United States, but all over the world, is our ways of getting information are completely different than they were 10 years ago. Um, and and it used to be we had these like sort of gatekeepers, and they were these big media outlets, and for better or worse, in both, for better and worse, they kind of controlled what information that we saw. And then we had this democratization of information with the internet and social media. And the idea was that everyone's going to have a voice and we're going to be able to get to the best information because it'll just be the survival of the fittest and the most fit, the best ideas are going to rise to the top. And if anyone's been on social media recently, that's not what happens usually, depending on your information spaces. But I don't know. I have was a basketball player as a young person, and I've got a lot of friends that are in and around the WNBA, and I'm getting constantly things about the WNBA. And my Facebook feed is full of BS about the WNBA, even shared by people who should know better. And so like we know that like the content that we're seeing is not high quality. So why is that happening? Well, we lost the gatekeepers, but we actually don't each have the same kind of voice. We have like we kind of the gatekeepers were displaced. They've been replaced by influencers and advertisers that pay for us in ways that we don't know that that was an advertisement, right? So our information spaces are highly structured. They're just structured in like instead of getting information from a few outlets that may have been a little bit biased, but were at least following journalistic standards most of the time, we're getting information like from someone who was like on Big Brother once, and then somebody else who like does makeup really well. And so like we're like who is shaping our information space is just a very different set of characters. And I don't know that we know how to navigate that, but we do know like in a situation where we need information about like do I evacuate or do I go over to my parents' house and like make sure that it's not too hot in there, whatever it is. How do I get that information? Well, I would say 15 years ago when I started studying Twitter, it was far more usable in terms of quality information than it is now. So we are going in the wrong direction of being able to find quality information during events. And people, I don't know, I haven't seen the research recently. When I was younger, when I was doing my early research, people would still say like the most trusted person in the community is the local fire chief. I hope that's still true. I hope that emergency responders still have that they still haven't been brought down into the muck, and they're not called fake news and everything else. And but I fear that people just it's really hard to find those voices. People don't trust officials of all kinds, and people don't even connect it to their local news. You're more likely to be connected to an influencer in some other part of the country or the world and get your information from there than you are to the local news. My parents live not far from me in Seattle. They get almost no local news. And they'll be telling me something I'm like about Seattle. I'm like, look out your window. Do you see that out your window? Because I don't think that's going on, right? And so what does it mean for emergency response when those local channels, we still have the Seattle Times, we still have local news, but people aren't really tuning in the same way. A lot of, especially young people, and so and reaching them through social media is such a mess right now because those spaces have really eroded in terms of quality.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because 15 years ago, we did use Twitter a lot. We spent a lot of time scraping data from Twitter and learning, and it was like a monopolistic breakup. You got Twitter, you got Blue Sky, you got Truth Social, you got 17,000 instances of Mastodon, and that's just for starters. There's no central point. And then you get to things like video, TikTok, government can't even use that. So even if you have an audience there, we can't use it
Well,
typically. So
you'll
that's
be able to soon enough.
well, only once we can archive it for records retrieval purposes.
Ah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so it's that piece of it. I'm curious though, what are some of the ways in the emergency management space that we can combat this? How do we can't stop it, but how do we address it in a meaningful way?
I don't know. I would have to throw that back out to you. I haven't done studies with emergency responders in at least 5 years, so I don't have the same. I've been talking to election officials, and
Got it.
they're just as, in fact, more so because they're in the middle of the political spin cycle. Um, I don't know the answer. I mean, you've got the complications of like the quality of information is down even on sites that were once a little bit higher quality. Moderation is gone. For better or worse, content moderation isn't happening on social media sites in the United States, except for pornography and some other pretty basic things. Um, You've got fragmented space. You mentioned it. Like there's so many different platforms. How would you even reach, there's no single place to go. There's no single message. There's no single format, right? So if you're going on Instagram, that's a different format than TikTok. That's a different format than X or Blue Sky or Mastodon. And to be in all places at once is impossible. It's not just about crafting the message. You've also got to manage the feedback that's happening there. You can't just put things out into ether. You have to be managing the feedback, and that I don't envy you. I don't know what the solution is. I know some folks have just like backed away from those sites, and that's hard because that's where the people are looking for the messages. Um, I don't know. I mean, in 2013, we were telling people to become little influencers, right? Like craft your brand, get out there, improvise. That's the only way to do it. And that is the only way to get reputation there. But it's a really dangerous place for an emergency manager to be at this moment in terms of um, eh, negative feedback, making mistakes, getting pulled into disinformation campaigns. It's just really complicated territory to navigate.
And it's hard for us to get that user base, right? A duck with a funny tail can get 1 million subscribers, and we got like 1,000. And that
Yeah.
doesn't help us a lot unless we get the duck to tell our story.
You know, having 1,000, well, what we saw in the early days, I don't know if this still translates, is when if you were there and you had at least a following of people that were local, when something happened and it was really necessary for you to get your message out, people could find you, right? So, and then you would grow in reputation. You would grow really quickly in followers, and that was actually we did a study of these accounts that were like, oh my God, I had 150 followers, and now I have 20,000 because there was there's fires here, and people are all of a sudden looking at my account. So even though I wouldn't judge your current following by as your utility for when it hits the fan. Um,
That's
but
fair.
it still doesn't answer the question of how to be everywhere at once, and I don't know how. I don't know how that works with smaller and smaller budgets. I don't know how it works.
That's fair. Um, when you think about emerging technology, and you can apply it to the election space, when you think of emerging technologies, are there technologies or tools that you think might show some promise in combating some of these online rumors and misinformation things?
My combating is hard. It's like our set of potential interventions have been shrunk by political action that have made it. We have to think smaller and smaller because, oh, you try that. Oh, that's biased. You try that. Oh, you're trying to censor people. You try that. Like you've got we have our the amount of things that we can do is much smaller. I think platforms could have been designed differently, and they could still be designed differently to not privilege the absolute bullshit that takes off. And there's certain kinds of things they could do differently around rewarding attention and things. So, but we don't have the power. Most of us don't have the power to change how platforms are designed. The thing that I do think is valuable is it would need probably need some platform help or would need a third party, and that is how do we both increase people's literacy and ability to navigate these information environments, so raise the understanding of how these information environments work, how you might be deceived, how you can use it, how you use these dynamics to spread your message when you need to get information out. So a little bit more on the education side, but that has to come with a set of tools that help people actually figure out what's going on the information spaces. So I can tell people about like how you might be manipulated on TikTok, but TikTok has you can't even figure out where that video came from. It's been copied from someone else, and and you don't know how it got to you and all these other things. And so I really think that if someone wanted to make information spaces more navigable, um, and if the platforms wanted to do that, they would need to add tools on top of their platforms to help people vet information. Google was playing with this for a while. They added a little dot 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 so you could like learn more very quickly about the search results. But we've actually gone away from that now. We've got these AI summaries that don't help you really figure out where information came from. In social media, like on Twitter X, they took out the links, like the things that helped you kind of like track the sources. We used to have social media that would tell you when an account had changed their name. It's very few social media platforms do that. That's the way that you can learn that someone's sitting, that they're deceptive. They've taken out all sorts of things that would help us see what's deceptive. Twitter used to have verified accounts. Now people can pay for different kinds of status. So platforms are moving away from the kinds of things that could help. And so now we're left with just like basically just with education. I feel like that's all we have, and it is right now is to like how do we help people navigate spaces that are actively hostile to finding quality information. Um, I think emergency managers, you have a little bit of an advantage right now that in not every time because you are politicized in some cases, and it depends on what's going on and where you're working. But there is a possibility that um, that you're not quite in the turmoil of the politicization. And like when a disaster happens, people want to be able to figure out whether they need to evacuate and find the resources they need and everything else. And so um, figuring out a way to take advantage of the fact that you may be a little better trusted than some of these other figures, but like it's challenging. It's a challenging environment.
The word that came to mind as you were talking was dumpster fire. Um, that's just kind of what it feels like sometimes.
Indeed, indeed.
Well, and I think one of the interesting things you were talking about platforms is there are AI tools that will help us identify AI generated images and videos. Like you could put a button in a platform that says you want to know if this was made by AI. Like I use the tools, I know they exist, but there's no incentive because clicks get pennies and pennies go into bank accounts and the money drives it at the end of the day.
Right. I mean, exactly. Like if I have that stupid shark swimming through the hurricane waters, right? Like is my first slide in a lot of my talks, and it would be very easy for a platform to just be able to like you put like you click on the link and it's like here's where this has showed up before.
Mhm.
Um, right, but that only works so far. And now we've got the AI-based images. So yeah, we could see that shark, but they're going to be able to make a new shark, any number of new sharks. And so yeah, um, I mean, it's going to be an arms race of like what can be created with these tools and what can be detected. And I do think the creation is always going to be a little out ahead of the detection, but that's not a reason not to do the detection. Like it's still helpful to when we can be able to show just the origins of an image, right? We're seeing right now images of like protests or like cityscapes that are from years ago being used to kind of characterize things that are happening in cities right now. And those are the kinds of things we should be able to very quickly be able to spot those and vet those.
Yeah, and for years we've told people like drag an image into the reverse image search in Google, but it takes an extra effort, right? And
How
there's
do I
no
do that
button
when
for it.
when I'm on TikTok? How do I do
There
that
you
when I'm
go.
on my phone?
Exactly. Yep. And those things are, I think, are part of that big challenge. But you said something earlier about literacy, and it came to mind as you were talking about AI, because probably a lot of people saw the picture from the floods last fall, and it was a very heart-rent, like it made your heart feel good because someone who's rescuing a puppy or something. And then if you stopped a minute and counted, he had six fingers, right? It's not the Princess Bride. There's no six-fingered man. That digital literacy piece, though, what are your thoughts on how we actually make people digitally literate or give them the opportunity to choose to become digitally literate?
Yeah. It- I don't think there's a silver bullet, right? And it's not a K through 12 issue either, right? We've got a K through 99 issue. We're all out there. And the young people are probably better at spotting it. But just the ability to do the detection of things being manipulated isn't enough. You also have to have the motivation to try. And if there's no repercussions for sharing it, if there's lots of reward for sharing it for whatever reason, positive attention, followers, likes, outrage, whatever you're looking for, um, and people don't see the long-term civic damage that it does, um, then we're not going to see people bother, right? So it doesn't matter if they know how, they're going to use it. So I think it's a combination of things. It's a three-part education. You have to have the tools and the skills to be able, we have to have the tools to help you use the skills. You have to have the skills to be able to recognize deception or whatever and be able to use the tools to be able to detect it. But then you've got to have the motivation, which takes an education about like what are the harms, and to have people understand the harms, both the acute harms in this context. I think this context has an advantage because the harms are acute, and most people, it's like scams. Like most people realize, like most people would agree, you don't want to be, misled during a crisis event about, whether or not to evacuate or whether or not something's affecting a particular area. It's not always that clear, um, but there's also that meta level of like, no, the pervasive spread of this stuff undermines so much about the ways that our current society works, and I don't know that we want to play with what the alternative is when we don't trust information or each other anymore, right? So, how do we give that civic lesson as well as the skills and the tools?
It goes right back to your when you started talking in the beginning, talking about frames, right?
Yeah.
You have to put on a different frame to look at this picture in a different light, and that's it's hard to do for all of the reasons you already said.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a question here that was in the chat that I'll ask. And it touches a little bit on what we talked about, but speaking about the rise of more AI generated images of disasters and response being used by non-EM influencers and even some within the emergency management, emergency response safety community for clout and for clicks, right? Do you think that those add to the rumor problem? Would you lump those into rumor and disinformation?
We would, our initial study of the Boston Marathon bombings, there were these pictures that had been appropriated of a little girl running in a marathon, or not a marathon, a little girl running in a 5K race or something, or maybe even shorter. She was a very small kid. And they had said that this kid was killed in the marathon, and it was not true. It was like just they just appropriated a picture, and we called that like a clickbait rumor, right? It's false. We could call it misinformation because it was false from the get-go. It was clickbait. It was purposefully done. The person, went and did that on purpose to spread it. And that's some of the content that we might see, that's AI generated. That like we have a picture of like the Hollywood sign burning in the LA fires last year, when there's two D's on Hollywood. And so like this it's AI slop. AI slop is everywhere. Um, Social media sites do not know what to do with it. If you just look through your feed at Facebook, Facebook has no idea what to do with the AI slop. It seems like it's privileged in my feed. I don't know how it got there. Maybe I spent too much time taking snapshots of it from my presentations, and it decided to give me more. But it is. Yeah, it's so easy. So they've lowered the barrier to making original content, which means it's not traceable back to the original shark picture or whatever, um, that can be created at scale. And so with the only I've done a project with two things, not with disaster. One is just a really quick one on the WNBA AI slop, which is mostly textual. Of like they're just using AI to grab words, create articles, outrageous headline, and they some of these, they're called clickbait farms. They'll run hundreds of these, and most of them get zero responses, but some of them will get thousands because it'll strike the right note. So it's so cheap to just throw spaghetti at the wall with this kind of content. And so that's part of it. And then the other one I've looked at, was one of my students have done one about Jesus AI slop on Facebook, where Jesus was like in all of these different, like he was made out of shrimp and he was doing something. So there's all of these like very religious. It was maybe 18 months ago. It was a really popular format. And again, these clickbait farms, a lot of them were not US based. They're from overseas, and they were just throwing out thousands of these or hundreds of these a day, and most of them we get zero likes, but a few will get a lot. So what you're going to see, like when a disaster happens, these AIs, we don't know if they actually have their fingers on the control, or if their algorithms that they use to generate this stuff just figures out what's trending and starts generating tons and tons of content. They're Because the internet is wired to like reward attention. They're just trying to get attention, and these things are going to get attention. I don't know whether like the word rumors or disinformation is the right one. I would just call it AI slop. Um, a lot of it is not good at all, but some of it's good enough to get attention, and it just clutters the information space. It just makes the information space less and less usable, and honestly leads to the situation where people aren't going to believe when it's a real thing happening, right? I don't know about you. I remember, and this was early. It's before SOAR or anything else. The first time I saw the image of the cathedral in France, the Notre Dame Cathedral on fire, I was like, "No, that's AI generated." Like I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it, and I saw it. And then one day I was walking in person. I'm outside in the world, and I see the fountain at UW, and the light was striking it in such a way. I'm like, "Yeah, that's not real. That's AI." I'm like, "Kate, like my brain is so used to thinking that everything is not real that I've started to discard my own like physical experiences." And so that's the real risk in these spaces is that again, people are opportunistically trying to get attention and it's working for them, but it's actually destroying, it's polluting the information commons, is what we call it, and making these information spaces less usable. And so if an emergency manager is doing it, that's when the civic lesson of like you're actually polluting this information space for others. And so when we need the information space, it's not going to be usable because you're doing this BS that gives you a short-term couple extra followers, but like in the long run, that's not helping us.
Yeah. So there's a couple more questions that have come in. One of them is, what best practices would you recommend for agencies or individuals to build community resilience against misinformation or rumors?
Yeah, I mean, we've got in community engaged research that's happening out of our center, and a lot of the times it's working with small groups of people and to learn what it is that they're most concerned about, and to start just um, helping them build information literacy of understanding like how these information systems work. And we've actually redefined our mission, not on detecting misinformation or something else, but on helping people navigate information systems. And we do think, information literacy, it should be in classrooms starting from like probably second and third grade, but it can't just be one class one time. It's got to be consistent. And all of us need it, right? I think I need it for AI stuff, right? And I study this stuff, right? So I think we do need to be, finding folks who know and being evangelists in our communities to help teach people how to best navigate these spaces and participate in these spaces.
All right. Yeah, we make all of our students take a class we call digital citizenship now, and it's digital literacy.
Yeah,
It's
amazing. And it is.
those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say one of the things that we've done wrong with that, and this is I'm just working on, so y'all are getting some newer stuff here, is a lot of our orientation to teaching that was all about spotting the bad stuff. We're teaching people how to spot the bad stuff, and we taught people to slow down. And a lot of times we took good people who wanted to do the right thing, and we convinced them to stop engaging. So they all step away from the information space, and the people who don't care are all still there, right? And so one of the things that we're trying to shift is not only do we help people see we don't want to be manipulated, you want to teach people how they're manipulated, but also think about now how do these systems work and how do you make them work for you? How do you make them work for you to be proactive, to share information that's good information, to get your story out into the world? And so start thinking a little bit less about like how do we each, eh, get scared of everything and skeptical and defensive and sort of like this sort of disempowering view. And how do we really teach digital literacy and digital citizenship with this empowering view? And so that's what I'm trying to shift a little bit and be kind of cognizant about. We don't want to constantly disincentivize the good people from participating in these spaces, which I'm afraid we may have done with some of the lessons of the last, 8 years, and we may need to shift a little bit because um, the good people have ceded ground on these information spaces.
There's some who have just entirely abandoned ship. They're like, nope, I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
It's not safe for me and I don't like it and I'm not doing it. But
And that's
that
okay. That's
it
okay.
is.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's we all make our choices, but if we all do that and the political leaders and people making decisions stay on those platforms, they're going to be influenced by the people that are still there. So for places like Twitter and X, I haven't been for years. I got harassed off the place. I haven't been, even though I started my research there. there are a lot of political leaders on both sides of the spectrum who are still there and are being influenced by the people that are there. And as all the other people, a bunch of people have left, they've left that space to. And I don't recommend that you go back there, but we have to recognize that that happens when we leave.
Yeah, I had to delete my account and then I ended up having to create one for research things, but nobody knows that it's there, right? It's just there.
Yeah, I
Um,
haven't gone back and done that yet. I'm still in maybe a PTSD or something. I haven't gone
yeah,
back, but I collect data through a different tool.
it's a
Although
it's
it's
an
harder
ugly
and harder
place.
these days. Yeah.
So that's a good segue into this next to the last question. If you could recommend one change in policy or practice to strengthen public resistance to misinformation, what would it be?
I think two. Well, three recommendations. One, I just mentioned it, is that the platforms need to be more transparent. And this is in for the European DSA. They actually had put a law in place that the platforms had to make data available, but it's actually not working the way that the law was supposed to be there. But like we used to have visibility into Twitter, and we have almost none into X. I get 10,000 posts a day, but I'd be able to get millions and be able to see what's going on. And I think that's important. In Facebook, we used to have crowd tangle. We don't have it anymore. We being researchers, journalists, and so data for the public good. I think we need to have rules that say these platforms are massively changing and shaping how people get information, and journalists, researchers, like the public, need to have some access to that. That's one. Two, information literacy. I think it's really important. We've already mentioned it. It should be in curriculum, and we need to get it in there starting in probably middle school, maybe even earlier. And it is in some places. I know some places have it, but it's a little bit inconsistent. And I know there's not a lot of time in the day for teachers, but this is going to be one of the most important skills students have. And the third one, I think platforms should be pushed to add signals for people to be able to use their information literacy tools, right? So they should be, so not only do they have data that's available to people with data science skills, but that users have the ability to track information, see where it comes from, see if something is AI. There should be the option. People don't have to use them, but like people should be empowered to be able to understand how information is coming to them. If we want to say like, oh, people have agency, they can figure it out. Well, they can't figure it out unless they have some visibility. And so, if you're going to argue that platforms can't moderate, then platforms should very well be providing information to people so they can at least, if they want to, try to figure out what's going on.
All right. Okay, last question. What training or resources does your center offer to help recognize and respond to misinformation?
We've got a lot of resources for election misinformation, what to expect when you're electing, and some. So we've been working on that. So anyone interested in those, we've been spending a lot of time there. We've got some student-led project right now that's trying to build sort of like community resources of like putting together all the stuff that we know and putting it into courses. Right now, if someone reaches out, we'll send somebody to give a talk, but we're trying to sort of standardize that there's just a few really nice pieces that we have that we'd like to put together. We also have had like Misinfo Day for several years where high school students come to for a day to learn about information literacy. We're putting the in-person part on pause, but we've built up these online resources and we're starting to collaborate with educators so that they can build out these lessons and kind of scale up and scale out beyond just the groups of folks that can physically get to us. So we have some available through the Center for Informed Public already, short videos, but we're building out more for the future as well. I'm probably missing some. If you have any inquiry, we've got a communications director, Michael Grass, at the CIP, and he is there to help us connect people like you all to resources that we're building.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I know we're at time. It's been my absolute delight to have this conversation with Dr. Kate Starbird from the Center for an Informed Public from the University of Washington. And with that, I will turn it back over to Brandy.
All right, great discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. Kate Starbird. I appreciate you coming and joining us. And everyone else, thank you so much for joining us as well. Our next event is Dr. Sherman Gilliams. It'll be on accessibility and inclusion in emergency management. And that will be on Wednesday, November 5th at 5 p.m. Eastern. Make sure to check your time zone and visit AEMO's LinkedIn page for the registration. And we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Have a great night, everyone. Bye. And Sarah,
Bye,
if you can
everyone.
stay around, Elizabeth